For 3 years Reid Pearson had called his mother every Sunday at 6 o'clock. For 3 years his older sister had answered first. He should have noticed that. He would spend a long time afterward thinking about it. The way Brenda always picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and ready, as though she had been sitting beside the phone waiting for it. She would say, "Mom's just resting. She'll call you back," or "Dad's having a good afternoon. I'll let him know you called." And Reid would thank her and hang up and go back to his blueprints or his dinner or whatever part of his Vancouver life had been interrupted. He had a project manager's instinct for efficiency. He had trusted Brenda the way he trusted a well-built structure, because it had never fallen before. The call that changed everything did not come from his sister. It came on a Wednesday morning in February, from a number he didn't recognize. He was standing in his firm's glass-walled boardroom, reviewing renderings for a mixed-use development in Burnaby, when his phone buzzed against the table. He ignored it once. The second time something made him step out. "Mr. Pearson, my name is Hellas Bouchard. I live in 4B. Your father, Vincent, he fell this morning in the hallway. The ambulance has taken him to Kelowna General." Reid stood in the corridor outside the boardroom for a full minute after the call ended. He was trying to understand why a neighbor, a woman whose name he had never heard, was the one telling him this. He was trying to understand the address she had given him, because it was not the address of the house where he had grown up. He was on a flight by noon. Kelowna General smelled the way all hospitals smell, like something sterile working hard to cover something that cannot be cleaned. A nurse pointed him to room 14. Reid walked the length of the corridor slowly, not because he was lost, but because part of him was not ready. Vincent Pearson had been a large man once. Not tall, he stood only 5'10", but broad in the way of men who have spent their lives doing physical work with their hands. He had built half the decks and fences in their old neighborhood, had run a small contracting business for 30 years, had carried lumber up 2 flights of stairs at 62 without breaking a sweat. He had that kind of stubborn, quiet strength that people stop noticing until it disappears. Reid noticed it had disappeared. His father lay against the hospital pillow, looking like something that had been carefully folded and set aside. The skin under his jaw had gone loose. His hands, resting on the blanket, were thinner than Reid remembered. The knuckles more prominent, the tendons visible beneath the surface. One wrist wore a hospital bracelet. The other had a bruise from the fall, mottled yellow-purple. But his eyes were still his father's eyes. He opened them when Reid came in, and the first thing he said was not hello or I'm fine or any of the reassurances Reid had expected. He said, "You came." 2 words. Reid had to set his bag down and look at the window for a moment because those 2 words held something in them he was not prepared for. Not surprise, exactly. Not even relief. More like the exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally been given permission to stop. "Of course I came," Reid said. His father's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Brenda said you were busy, said the firm was going through a difficult quarter." Reid pulled a chair to the bedside. "What quarter?" "Last fall." His father looked at the ceiling. "And the spring before that you're always busy," she says. Agnes Pearson was waiting in the hospital's small family lounge down the hall. She had put on lipstick. Reid could see that immediately. And she had combed her hair neatly, pinned back on the left side the way she always wore it for company. She was sitting very straight in a plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap over a paper coffee cup she hadn't opened. When she saw Reid, she stood too quickly and put her arms around him before he could read her face. She held on longer than felt like a greeting. "I would have called you," she whispered into his shoulder. "I wanted to." He pulled back and looked at her. She was smaller than he remembered. His mother had always been compact and energetic, the kind of woman who moved through a house like she had somewhere important to be. Now she stood the way people stand when they are tired of standing, but have forgotten what it felt like to sit comfortably. "Why didn't you?" he asked. She took a breath. "Brenda handles the phone. She set it up so her number goes first. She said it was easier so we wouldn't miss calls. I'm not always fast enough with the thing." "What thing?" "The new phone. She gave me a new phone last year. Said the old one was outdated." Agnes glanced toward the corridor. "I don't always understand how it works. Brenda said she'd help manage it." Reid looked at his mother's hands around the paper coffee cup. He said nothing yet, but the shape of something he had not wanted to name until this moment, was beginning to show itself. Hellas Bouchard had left a note at the nurse's station. She was a retired schoolteacher in her late 60s with careful handwriting, and the unhurried manner of someone who had decided, late in life, to say the things that needed saying. She had written the building address, her own apartment number, and at the bottom a single line. "Your parents are very good people. I am sorry no one came sooner." Reid drove to the address after leaving the hospital. The building was on the east side of the city, 4 blocks from a highway ramp, flanked by a coin laundry and a closed nail salon. It was not a bad building exactly, but it was the kind of building that had stopped being maintained around the same time the owners had stopped returning calls. The exterior was faded clay brick. The buzzer panel near the entrance had 3 buttons with no labels. The small lobby smelled of carpet that had been shampooed once and then given up on. Apartment 3C. Reid had a key from his mother's purse. He stood in the doorway for a long time before going in. The apartment was clean. He noticed that immediately, and it hurt in a specific way. The way that something carefully tended in difficult circumstances always hurts more than simple neglect would have. Agnes had arranged things. There were tea towels folded over the oven handle. There was a small plant on the windowsill. Barely alive, but someone had been trying. There was a framed photograph on the side table near the sofa. The 4 of them, Reid and Scott and Brenda and their parents. Taken at the old house 20-some years ago. His father looked enormous. His mother was laughing at something outside the frame. That photograph was the only thing in the apartment that still looked like their family. Reid opened the kitchen cupboards one by one. A box of oatmeal, a tin of soup, half a bag of rice, a bottle of vitamin D and 2 prescription bottles, one of which was empty, the label dated 6 weeks prior. He stood in that kitchen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and searched the property registry for the address of the house he had grown up in. The house his father had bought in 1987 and paid off by 2009. The house with the cedar deck Vincent had built himself over 2 weekends in June, and the garden Agnes had kept every summer without fail. The registered owner as of 4 years ago was listed as Brenda Tate. Scott Pearson answered on the 4th ring. He was in Calgary, doing something with a car. Reid could hear a garage door in the background, the sound of something being set down on concrete. His voice, when he finally said hello, had the careful flatness of a man who already knew what this call was about. Reid didn't waste time. Tell me what you know. There was a long pause. I know enough, Scott said. That's not an answer. Another pause. Then the sound of the garage door closing, the background going quiet. When Scott spoke again, his voice was different, lower. Like something he had been storing in a smaller and smaller container had finally broken through the side. Dale did most of it, he said. Brenda went along. I think she told herself it was practical. That's how she talks about it, practical. Reid waited. The house first. Dale drafted something. He called it an estate planning document. He told Mom and Dad it would save them from probate, from taxes, from the boys fighting later. Scott's voice tightened. They signed. You know how they are. They don't like to cause trouble. They don't want to be a burden. Dale used that. He knew exactly which words to use. And then Brenda started charging them rent. For the house they signed over. He said it the way you say something you have been ashamed of for years. Without softening, without excuse. When they couldn't keep up, she moved them to the apartment. Said it was more manageable for their age. Said she was doing them a favor. And the money I was sending. Scott went quiet for a moment. She gave them some. Not much. Enough to keep them from calling you, I think. She told them you were struggling, that your company had debt, that they shouldn't ask for more because you were doing everything you could. Reid sat down on the edge of the bed in his mother's apartment. The Springs gave more than they should have. How long have you known? He asked. The pause that followed was its own kind of answer. 2 years, Scott said, maybe a bit more. Reid did not say anything. She had something on me, Scott said quickly, from years back, a thing I'm not proud of. She said if I said anything she'd tell Mom and Dad. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked, that they seemed okay. His voice broke on that last word. I drove by the apartment last spring. Mom was at the window. She didn't see me. I kept driving. Reid heard the grief in his brother's voice, and did not find it comforting. I need everything you have, he said. Every conversation, every message, anything Dale ever gave you in writing, and I need you to be willing to say it out loud. There was a long silence. Yes, Scott said, I'll say it. He found the notes in his mother's sewing basket. Agnes Pearson had never been a woman who threw things away. She kept birthday cards tied with elastic bands. She kept receipts for appliances that had stopped working a decade ago. In the bottom of the wicker sewing basket, beneath a layer of spools and a pincushion shaped like a tomato, were 7 small pieces of paper folded twice, each one covered in his mother's careful handwriting. The kind of handwriting from a generation that was taught to write, as though someone important might read it one day. They were not dated. They were not addressed. They were notes she had written to herself or to no one, or perhaps to Reid specifically, on the nights when the silence of that apartment had gotten too loud to hold. The pharmacy said the prescription costs more now. I paid what I could. V asked about calling R directly. I said I would ask Brenda. She said he is very busy. She has said this for many months. I don't want to make trouble. But I don't understand where the money goes. I think I have made a mistake. I don't know how to say it without hurting everyone. Reid read each one twice. Then he folded them along their original creases and placed them on top of the empty prescription bottle on the kitchen counter. He thought about his mother sitting at the small table in this apartment, writing those sentences down because there was no one to say them to, then folding them and putting them away because sending them felt like a betrayal of something: the family's privacy, her own dignity, the image of a woman who managed. The loneliness of that act was the thing Reid would remember longest. There was one more thing. His mother's brooch, a small oval of marcasite in pale blue enamel, passed down through 3 women before reaching Agnes. It had sat in his mother's jewelry box for as long as Reid could remember. When he asked Agnes about it 2 days after arriving, gently while they were sitting in the small kitchen together, his mother's face did something complicated. Brenda took it for safekeeping, she said. She was worried about theft. The building, you know. Reid had looked it up that same evening. He found it listed through an estate consignment house in Vancouver, the same city he had been living in for 11 years, sold 8 months ago for $620. His mother's inheritance, the last physical link to her own mother, had passed through a consignment sale 2 neighborhoods from his office. He might have walked past the shop window on any given Tuesday. The lawyer Reid called was named Beverly Arnott. She had been practicing family and elder law in Kelowna for 18 years. And she had a habit of reading documents with the focused stillness of someone who had stopped being surprised by people, but had not stopped being appalled by them. She read through the title transfer first. "This is a standard form," she said, setting it flat on her desk, "but the execution is not standard. Your father's signature here." She pointed to the bottom of the second page. "I'd want a handwriting analyst to confirm. But the pressure is inconsistent with someone signing a document they understand. This looks like someone who was signing on trust." Quickly, without reading. Reid said nothing. "The rent arrangement is potentially the more actionable issue," Beverly continued. "If your parents were charged rent for a property they believed they still held equity in, and if the funds transferred to your sister were represented to you as care expenses, we are looking at financial abuse of a vulnerable adult. In British Columbia that triggers a mandatory reporting obligation and opens a civil claim. What about the property itself? Challenging a voluntary transfer is harder, but if we can establish undue influence, given your father's health history and the timing of the transfer." She paused. "It's not impossible, I've done it." Reid looked at the folder of documents in front of her. 3 years of bank transfers to Brenda's account. The title record. Scott's written statement. The 7 folded notes from the sewing basket, photographed and printed, because he couldn't bring himself to let the originals leave the apartment. Beverly Arnott set down her pen. "Let's begin," she said. Brenda Tate arrived at the hospital on the 3rd day. She came dressed well, carrying a plant in a decorative pot and a bag from a bakery, and she greeted Reid in the corridor with the specific warmth of someone who has spent years being the one who manages situations. She called the whole thing a bit of a scare, and said she had been meaning to come by sooner. But Dale had been dealing with something at work. Later in the hospital cafeteria, with Scott joining by phone and the folder of documents between them on the table, Reid said what he needed to say quietly and without hurry. He laid out the title records, the rent receipts, the expired prescription, the notes from the sewing basket, the brooch. Each item placed on the table the way you place evidence, not accusations, because the evidence was already the accusation and it did not need help. Brenda tried several explanations, practical ones about estate planning and family intentions and the complexity of caring for aging parents from a distance. She tried to redirect toward circumstances, toward Dale, toward Reid's own years of absence. Then Vincent Pearson appeared in the cafeteria doorway. He had not been asked to come. He had walked there himself slowly, with the help of a cane one of the nurses had found him. His face was pale from the effort but his eyes were clear. He looked at his oldest daughter for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he has been trying to understand for a long time, and has finally understood. "I built that house with my hands," he said. His voice was quieter than it used to be, rougher, but it did not waver. "Your mother planted every tree in that yard. We were not a burden to you, Brenda. We were your parents." Brenda did not answer. Vincent looked at Reid. "Do what needs to be done," he said. "Don't let her talk you out of it." Beverly Arnott filed the elder financial abuse complaint with the provincial authority the following week. A freeze was placed on the family home pending investigation of the title transfer. The consignment sale company cooperated fully with documentation of the brooch transaction. Scott gave a sworn statement, all of it including the parts that cost him most to admit, and he gave it without conditions. The investigation would take time, legal things always do, but it had begun and that could not be undone. Reid stayed in Kelowna for 3 weeks. He arranged a new apartment for his parents. Second floor, elevator access, a balcony where the afternoon light came in from the west. He found a pharmacy 2 blocks away, transferred the prescriptions and arranged grocery delivery. He sat with his father in the evenings while the sky went orange over the lake, and they talked about the old contracting work. About summers from 30 years ago. About the back fence Reid had helped rebuild at 14 when his father had let him make every cut himself. On his last evening before flying back to Vancouver, Reid found his mother in the new kitchen, making tea. She moved through the unfamiliar space with the careful attention of someone still learning it, finding the right drawer on the second try, locating the mugs with a small satisfied sound. "This is a good kettle," she said, as though the thought had just occurred to her. "Better than the one at the old place." Reid leaned against the counter and watched her. "I should have come sooner, Mom." Agnes set 2 mugs on the counter and considered the statement the way she considered most things. Honestly, without false comfort but without cruelty either. "Yes," she said simply, "you should have." It was not an accusation, it was just true. And being allowed to hear the truth, Reid understood, was its own kind of grace. The kind that only becomes possible once you stop being protected from it. He flew home the next morning. His parents had his direct number now, programmed into a new phone that no one else had access to. His mother had called him already, just to confirm it worked. She had said hello Reid and then laughed at herself for being nervous about a telephone. He had laughed too. And the sound of it, her voice unfiltered reaching him directly without passing through anyone else's hands, was something he had not known he was missing until it was finally there. He did not make the same mistake again.